Jordan Love and Michael Wilson are sneaky good fantasy plays this week. We get into the best sleepers and DFS plays for week 11 on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, fantasy, and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Today, like every Friday during the season, we are going to give you our favorite sleepers of the week. We'll each give you our favorite guy at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. Then to close out this week's of shows, we'll give you our DFS picks. So our favorite prize picks of the week, and then our FanDuel lineup to close out today's show. Starting at quarterback, Vinny, who do you got as your sleeper of the week for week 11?
Yeah, I have a choice that might come into question based on the fact his receivers are really hurt. He lost his go-to guy, Tucker Kraft. But I'm going with Jordan Love this week. He's got to spark the Packers. They have to beat the Giants here. It's on the road, and they're facing Jameis Winston on the other side. So this is a game they've lost two straight now. They lost to the Panthers and then the Eagles back-to-back at home. So they go on the road. Jordan Love has to play better. He's got to make it work with whoever's out there with him. And Matthew Golden, I know, got hurt, and there's questions about the receivers. They were really dwindling here, but I think Jordan Love does a little bit more with his legs to help his stats in this one. The Giants do give it up on the ground to quarterbacks. So I think he needs to run more and take charge a little bit of this offense, playing off Josh Jacobs. Jacobs is going to allow him to throw the ball downfield with his big arm. He should have a nice game. Plus, the Giants stink in the secondary. So if he's somewhat well protected, the play action can develop off the running game of Jacobs. Jordan Love's going to have a shot at multiple touchdowns, a good rushing day, and around 250 yards passing. So I think overall he can compile for you if you've been streaming or playing like a Daniel Jones. This is the opportunity to do that with Jones off to play Jordan Love. If you've been just trying for a week that you could actually play Love or feel better about him in two quarterback or super flex leagues, this is it. Love comes through, I think. It's not a huge game, but I think 250, 2 touchdowns, maybe up 30 or 40 rushing yards.
Yeah, he was definitely in consideration for me, but I like Tua Tagovailoa's matchup just a little bit better. And at this point, the Dolphins might even have higher upside offense than the Packers do as of late because they have scored 30 or more points in 2 of their last 3 games. Now, Tua hasn't been like a great fantasy quarterback in any way this season, but the Commanders are just that bad of a defense. They've allowed a league high 8.9 passing yards per attempt to opponents this year. They've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, and it's only gotten worse as the season's gone on. The last 4 quarterbacks to face the Commanders have all scored at least 23 fantasy points. As Dak Prescott, Patrick Mahomes, Sam Darnold, and Jared Goff. So maybe Tua won't have a 23-plus point game, but I do think his floor in this game has to be 18 points in this offense. So I think he's a pretty good pickup and play this week. Vinny, who do you have at running back for your sleeper of the week?
Yeah, I love the Tua pick. Again, a lot of just pocket passers throwing downfield have gotten down against the Commanders defense. So running back, I'm going back to the Packers. Well, believe it or not, I think they're going to kind of smash the spot. They're going to have to rely a little bit more on Emmanuel Wilson. Now, the Giants are a weird team because they give up a lot of rushing yards to multiple backs in games. And I'll go back to a good example just a few weeks ago. Saquon Barkley and Tank Bigsby both hitting 100 yards against this team. So they tend to give it up multiple guys. I believe going back to the 49ers game as well, they had a lot of issues with both Christian McCaffrey and Brian Robinson Jr. whenever he came in. So this team somehow, that strategy doesn't always work, playing the top backup to a prolific runner. But again, the Giants are so bad against the run. The Packers need a spark in the running game. I don't think Emmanuel Wilson is going to steal everything here from Jacobs, but in a handful of touches, he can get it done. We've seen guys like this do it, like a Ty Johnson or someone, right? Trickling off the lead back in a really good matchup. Well, again, the Giants give it up again to multiple backs in multiple weeks. They struggle. They just cannot stop the run. I think Wilson is going to get there a little bit more because he's a bit explosive, right? So I could see one explosive play where Wilson gets in maybe to the end zone on that one. So again, I can see him get 7 to 8 touches. I think he's an okay flex play if you're desperate this week, and maybe you're relying on a Colts or Saints player to do that. And now you have somebody else.
My guy, I actually feel pretty confident playing him as a running back too this week. It's not going too deep, but it's Woody Marks against the Titans. He has scored at least 13 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 weeks. Last week, he played on nearly 80% of the team snaps. It was at 79%, and he was productive with his opportunities. He had 81 yards. He scored a touchdown and 18 touches last week. And his best game of the season so far, or of his career, because this is his rookie season, what came in week 4 against the Titans when he put up 119 yards, 2 touchdowns, and scored 28 fantasy points against them in full PPR league. And the Titans have just been a team you want to start your fantasy running backs against all year long. They've allowed the 4th most points on average to the position. So I really like Woody Marks this week against the Titans.
Yeah, that's a good pick. I had him on my short list as well. I think he's a pretty obvious guy that you can really feel good about, not just for this game, but maybe for the rest of the year. We'll see. People keep waiting on Joe Mixon. Don't wait for it, folks. I think they're happy with Woody Marks. And Nick Chubb is probably going to see a decline in his workload as we go deeper into the second half here. As the Texans try to do something to save their season, they're still kind of in the wild card hunt. We'll see where they get there. Now, I'm doubling up on the Dolphins as well. Well, we are as a show. I doubled up on the Packers. I'm going to a Dolphins target. It's Malik Washington. He didn't do much other than score the touchdown last week against the Bills, but he is technically a big play target. And we've just seen the Commanders give it up to big plays here. The Commanders also struggle against a tight end. The problem is the Dolphins, without Darren Waller, really do not have that key target now at tight end. So I think Malik Washington is going to be the number 2 through and through, playing off Jalen Waddle. Like, it's a deep shot, right? You take it. I think I'd prefer it in 14-team leagues or a little bit deeper than that. But if you're struggling and you just want to take a shot with somebody with upside, you don't like somebody in a tougher matchup, you can say, hey, I'm going to pivot to Malik Washington, and a little bit of a dark throw. But he clearly is the number 2. They're playing the Commanders. Big plays alert here. So I think the same way I feel about Wilson, that something's going to trickle off the other guy and really be there to produce. So Malik Washington is my guy. So Waddle and Washington against Washington. So that's how it's going to go this week.
I'm going to go with Michael Wilson of the Cardinals against the 49ers. The 49ers defense is incredibly just hurt. And since week 5, they've allowed the 2nd most receiving yards to wide receivers this year. With just all their injuries. And now the Cardinals are dealing with so many injuries on offense. Marvin Harrison Jr. is dealing with appendicitis. He'll be out this week after having surgery. Zay Jones tore his Achilles last week, was placed on IR. Michael Wilson should have a big opportunity to see a heavy target share. I don't know how efficient he will be, but I do expect him to get, maybe double-digit targets and, come through with a good amount of receptions against this 49ers depleted defense. And since over their last 6 games, the 49ers have allowed multiple, not even just one, multiple wide receivers to hit at least 11 fantasy points against them in each game over the last 6 weeks. So I do expect Michael Wilson and Trey McBride to have big games this week. I do prefer him in full PPR, but in half PPR, I think he's fine as well.
Yeah, they're going to be targeted a lot. Trey McBride is going to dominate the targets here against the 49ers after the Rams tight ends had some really good success, minus Fred Warner, against that defense last week. So McBride should see a lot of targets, but they're going to have to throw. I think the 49ers offense trending upward as well, coming to the desert helps. That's going to help the passing volume going Wilson's way from Jacoby Brissett this week. Now, we have 2 Wilsons so far, 2 Dolphins, 2 Packers, almost 2 Loves, but I'm going with Colston Loveland instead of any love that we have at tight end. I don't think there is one, but I do like Colston Loveland quite a bit this week against the Vikings. It's on the road. He did have a pretty solid game last week. It wasn't as spectacular as his coming out party against the Bengals, who just give it up big time to tight ends all season long, but Loveland was still very active against the Giants. So he is a tough guy to cover. And I think they're going to find that out this week, the Vikings. And again, the Vikings, look, they've been okay, but I think they've let down a bit defensively where they are a little bit vulnerable against the tight end. So again, last week they gave up a short touchdown to Mark Andrews. They could have given up a little bit more there. So overall, I think there's a touchdown in store for Loveland. I'll give you that. And probably about 6 catches, 60 yards. That's kind of deal here this week for Loveland. But I do like him as a guy that you may want to start going forward in this offense.
And to finish up our sleepers here at tight end, I'm going to go with Pat Freiermuth. He gets the Bengals.
Yep.
And not only are the Bengals by far the best matchup for fantasy tight ends this season, Freiermuth always destroys the Bengals. Just throughout his entire career, he's averaged 16 fantasy points per game against them in his 8 career games. He's never scored fewer than 11 points against them. And over his last 4 matchups against the Bengals, he's put up 28 points, 23, 19, and 21 points. And this year he's had one good game, and it was against the Bengals, and it was a killer game, 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's his only game this season. He's had more than 33 receiving yards. Just something happens when he plays the Bengals. He just balls out. So I am going with him. We are going to transition to our DFS talk of the week with PrizePicks, our top 3 picks each of the week to start, and then we'll get into our FanDuel lineups after that.
All right, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by PrizePicks. You and I make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season, whether you're following the NFL, NBA, or both. There's no better time to jump in on the action right now than Week 11. If you haven't tried it yet, PrizePicks is the simplest way to play. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes fewer than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere PrizePicks operates. That includes California, Texas, and Georgia. It's a lot of fun to play PrizePicks. We will give our PrizePicks picks of the week mores for numbers that we're looking at this week. And plus, if one of your players leaves early with an injury, the injury reboot saves your lineup for a loss. So that's a lot of good stuff there. And again, we'll give you advice on who to play. You can, of course, make your own lineups. You can choose from several hundreds of options here, whether you're playing NFL or NBA. Just download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's the code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, let's continue talking PrizePicks, Michelle, and reveal our PrizePicks picks of the week. This is also a bit of a recap for maybe our sleepers, things that we told you and guys we liked from earlier in the week when we got through our quarterback, tight end, running back, and wide receiver rankings. So if you missed any of those, catch up there. But a little bit of a refresher now, Michelle. Who's your first PrizePick pick?
I'm going with Jalen Waddle, more than 80.5 receiving yards against the Commanders. Since Tyreek Hill's injury, I mean, he's hit this pretty much every week outside of the Browns game where it was in Cleveland, bad weather. But it's been 110 yards, 95, 99, 82, 84 yards in all of the other games, and he just needs 81 yards. Really love Tua this week, so he's got to be targeting his top guy for that to happen. But no team has allowed more receiving yards to wide receivers than the Commanders this season. And just over their last 4 games, over the Commanders' last 4 games, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jamison Williams, CeeDee Lamb, Rashee Rice, and George Pickens have all had at least 82 receiving yards against them. So I really like this Waddle more than 80.5 receiving yards.
Yeah, I love that one for sure. I mean, they give up a lot of big plays, so hopefully you can get it on 1 or 2 catches here. That'll be great. Do some damage after the catch. And just talked about Jordan Love, and I said he might pop up later in the show, and he is right here. The rushing total really low for Jordan Love. He actually got going well against the Eagles. Speaking of the Eagles, we had the Eagles against Green Bay with Jalen Hurts. His number was 26.5 is what I gave you for more. He had 27 yards in that game. So it counts. It counts if you're half yard. I think in kind of trading off, I think Derrick Henry was a half yard shy himself. So all that good stuff, it balances out here. Sometimes it's tough, but these numbers, again, are pretty right on. But the 11.5 rushing yards He did run a little bit more against the Eagles, and I think he's going to have to run a little bit more here. Again, he's going to be flushed out. The way the Giants play defense is kind of their backs turn. They're a little bit aggressive, right? That's why they give up numbers to the running backs. That's why they struggle against tight ends. The way they play defense really opens up a lot of the middle of the field to take off and do some damage here. So 11.5, the number's just too low for me because I think he can get it. If he takes off and run twice in this game, I think he gets that against the Giants.
And he needs to take off and run more, that's for sure. I'm going with another Jalen. I'm going with Jalen Warren, more than 17 fantasy points against the Bengals. He has hit this number only twice this season. And the fantasy points for PrizePicks is full PPR, just to keep that in mind. But one of those games that he did hit this number was against the Bengals earlier this year. He had a season high 158 scrimmage yards and 19.8 fantasy points against them. The Bengals are allowing the most points to running backs by far this season at 33.5 fantasy points per game. And this really has become Warren's backfield. He's already averaging 17 touches per game this season. And Mike Tomlin came out this week to say he wants Warren to get more touches, like utilize him more, feed him more. So I think he's going to get a lot of touches in this game and a great matchup. And in the 9 games that the Bengals have played this season, they've allowed 9 running backs to score over 17 fantasy points. So I think Warren hits this number. And I really like this one this week.
Yeah, go back to running back rankings. If you missed that show, we really loved Warren. We talked about how great this matchup is. So again, good usage there of what we learned earlier in the week. Michelle, now, I always try to find a good receiving yards number here with a running back, and I found one. Ashton Jeanty, 15.5 receiving yards against the Cowboys. Now, they're kind of fickle about throwing to Ashton Jeanty, but when they throw quite often to him. We've seen some games where he's kind of saved his stats by what he's done as a receiver if he's not balled up. But as a runner, sometimes he can have a big game, but sometimes he is. And then you're like, where are the numbers here? It's very inefficient. I got to count on touchdowns and receiving here, but you might be doing the same against the Cowboys. I think they're going to fly around and try to play well against the run. I also think the Raiders will be trailing at some point, have to do some checkdowns, maybe be trailing big here, and then Jeanty can't run the ball. They're going to have to still get the ball in his hands through shorter passes. So 15.5 receiving yards. A number, again, just like with Jordan Love, is less than 20. Had to go for it here.
I like it. My last one is going to be Arondé Gadsden, the tight end for the Chargers. More than 10 fantasy points against the Jaguars. He is good to go after suffering a bruised quad last week. He's hit before leaving last week's game. The 4 games prior, he had at least 11.8 points in all 4 of those games. The Jaguars, a great team to be playing your fantasy tight ends against, have allowed the 2nd most points per game to the tight end position. And over their last 4 games played, they've let AJ Barner, Terrence Ferguson, Brock Bowers, and Dalton Schultz all to score at least 10 fantasy points, over 10 fantasy points, which is what Gadsden needs here. With Schultz scoring 18.3 points against them last week and Bowers scoring 43 points against them in week 9. So I really like it's a low number for me. I would have even gone a little bit higher, but Gadsden more than 10 fantasy points against the Jaguars.
Yeah, I also looked at Gadsden this week. He had 50.5 was his number for receiving yards in this game. Schultz cleared that. I think he had 53 or somewhere in there last week. So he definitely cleared that number in the matchup against the Jaguars. Now it's great. And the funny thing is he actually might be the healthiest of the receivers. All of them were doing some limited work just between Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen, and Quentin Johnson, all the injury report, all are expected to play. But I think this could be a big McConkey-Gadsden game. So I love that pick by you. And then I'm also going with a tight end for my 3rd and final one. If you took Gadsden from me, I'm going with another podcast favorite, George Kittle, 52.5 against the Cardinals here. He had a big game last week. He's a guy that can go off, and Brock Purdy is coming back and his favorite quarterback. And it was nice. Kittle warmed up with Mac Jones just in time for Purdy's return here. Again, he's had a history of some big games when he can get in against the Cardinals, and it has meaning. The games he usually produces big time. And with Ricky Pearsall back, you'll have a little bit of attention deflected here, but I definitely see George Kittle exploding this week, and it's only 52.5. So if we get to 60 yards there with the potential for a touchdown, we're looking good here. So George Kittle more against the Cardinals this week.
Yeah, if you have Kittle, you have to be so excited that Purdy is back. That's what you've been waiting for. He did have a big week last week, finally, but very excited for George Kittle and Brock Purdy to be back. We are going to finish up today's episode and our week 11 prep with our FanDuel winning lineup of the week. We'll give that to you right after a quick break. The NFL season is in full swing, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout. It can be very frustrating. That's why I always use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. And the app is incredibly easy to use. In a couple taps, you can already find amazing deals. And I'm talking about your favorite NFL games as low as $100. And you get to see the view from your seat before you buy, so you're never surprised when you get there. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket. Go download Game Time today. All right, let's get into our FanDuel lineups of the week. Again, to remind everyone, we do not know who we chose. So if we have anybody similar, that's just because we both really like them this week and coming through with what we said. So who do you have at quarterback this week, Vinny? Because my guy, I'm not super confident, but I went real cheap.
Yeah, I also made this pick at sportingnews.com as my quarterback, and I stuck with it throughout the week, despite the cost being on the higher side at Justin Herbert against the Jaguars. Again, we talked about that Gadsden matchup. It's also good for McConkey and the rest of these receivers to get open. Kamani Vidal seems to be up and down here with his production. This is going to be a high volume passing game for Herbert to get the best of Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars this week. So I do like Justin Herbert putting an all-around great game on the road at 8,200. He's my quarterback.
So yeah, you went with a much safer quarterback with a good upside there. I'm going super cheap. I'm saving money at 6,800, one of the cheapest in the main slate, and I'm going with JJ McCarthy. It's a home game. He gets the Bears. The Bears defense is stinking right now. They're allowing so many points to fantasy quarterbacks. And I mean, McCarthy has had two good fantasy games so far in his 4 starts, 22 points in week 1 against the Bears. And that was on the road. And then in week 9, 19 points. So it's not like we haven't seen it. He has a rushing capability. And even though he's not throwing for a ton of yards, he has been throwing touchdowns. He has a couple touchdowns in both week 1 and week 9. So I'm willing to take that risk with him and go super cheap so I can pay up elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a good start. I mean, yeah, it's an interesting against the grain. Definitely a good contrarian pick if you're going to go with someone that a lot of people may not have in their lineup. So that'll be good. Also, if he goes off, you'll have a bit of a unique spin on that. I'll go to the backfield here. Woody Marks, we talked about. That was an easy mark, so to speak, to put in the lineup here, just to say, look, he's going to have a nice game against the Titans. Yards from scrimmage. He can put up the same numbers he had last week. That where you're looking at 3x return on him this week, right, at 6,300. So you can definitely get those 18, 19 points from him and feel good about that. And then we also talked about this guy in full, and he was cheap. He was the guy I could afford. This. Weirdly enough, this was the last person I put in my lineup because he lined up perfectly with his value at 7,000. It's Jalen Warren. So really excited about Marks and Warren. Go figure that's my backfield in DFS, but really excited about that combination this week.
I have the exact same running backfield. Jalen Warren and Woody Marks. Their prices were too good, and we like them both this week, so that made sense. I will say, in my flex, I was able to get Christian McCaffrey. So I keep my flex for last. I had that $10,000. He's the most expensive skill player on the week, but I was able to fit him in. So my running backs are Jalen Warren, Woody Marks, and Christian McCaffrey. Now, for my wide receivers, I went with Nico Collins against the Titans. Even with Davis Mills, I feel good about that. He should get a lot of targets. Great matchup. T. Higgins against the Steelers, terrible defense. He should have a couple big plays in there. And then Michael Wilson, who I just talked about as my sleeper of the week against the 49ers. He's super cheap at 5,500, so I went with Michael Wilson. So again, Nico Collins, T. Higgins, and Michael Wilson as my wide receivers.
All right, you won't believe this, but those are my 3 wide receivers as well this week.
No, they're
Uh,
not.
yes, they are.
That's wild.
Last
Wild.
week was the first time we didn't match anybody. I think we're making up for it because we now have 5 matches here.
That's
I don't think
crazy.
we're matching it elsewhere because, again, I picked someone else for my flex. But yeah, Collins, Wilson, Higgins. I wanted to stack Justin Herbert. I thought about doing it wide receiver, but then I got the good report on Arondé Gadsden too. So I put him in at tight end here, but I had some money left, and I said, who could triple his money at a decent value? I said it's George Kittle. So I have him and Arondé Gadsden, one in the flex this week. Again, I think both these guys have the potential to go off. They're big play downfield tight ends. So they're game breakers where if they score a touchdown and put their targets together, they can both crack 100 yards in a game. It does not surprise me if they do. So Gadsden is like looking like maybe the next Kittle, right? A guy that can stretch the field and make some plays. So I'm excited about that. I'm also not as excited that we didn't match everywhere. That would have been crazy this week, but we got close.
That's the most we've ever done was 5 matches. Both of
Yeah.
our running backs and our 3 wide receivers is pretty crazy. My tight end is Pat Freiermuth, $5,000 super
Thought
cheap.
about him.
Best matchup, and he always destroys them. So I had to go there. And again, my flex was Christian McCaffrey. And then for my defense, I'm going with the Falcons at 3,300. I really wanted to get the Texans in there against the Titans. They're a little too expensive for me to fit in if I wanted Christian McCaffrey. So went with the Falcons at home. We know they have a good pass defense, and Bryce Young just not it, right? So Rico Dotto can still do his thing, but they can get some turnovers against Bryce Young in this offense. So I like them at 3,300.
Yeah, I do not have the Falcons. I do have the Chiefs this week because, again, I think coming off a bye, they're going to play really good defense. They did not play that great defense against the Bills before the bye. They're facing the Broncos. We know what kind of problems Bo Nix can have. And the Chiefs are a very tough matchup. They're tough on his receivers. They're tough on the running game. You may not have J.K. Dobbins. Looks like that's the trend. So, wow. I mean, this could be a Chiefs statement game. I'll just say that. I mean, Andy Reid after the bye has just been fantastic with his team going into Denver. I think they're hearing the noise. They're looking up at Denver. They're hearing about the Patriots, who are now the best team in the NFL, 9-2. The Chiefs are coming, and this is the week. They get the Broncos this week. I will not play them against the Colts next week, but the Chiefs are going to start flexing as a team. They do it with defense this week in Denver.
I like it. All right, to recap, my quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy, running backs, Jalen Warren, Woody Marks, and Christian McCaffrey. Wide receivers, Nico Collins, T. Higgins, and Michael Wilson. Tight end, Pat Freiermuth, and my defense is the Falcons.
All right, I don't need to go over 5 of these guys again. I'll just go their last names here. Marks, Warren, Collins, Wilson, Higgins. We're matching. So if those guys all stink, we're in trouble on both lineups here. But Justin Herbert's my quarterback. I stacked him with my tight end, Arondé Gadsden. 2, George Kittle in the flex. So a pair of tight ends here, 12 personnel for this lineup. And then my defense, the Kansas City Chiefs at Denver.
That will be it for today's episode. That's it for our week 11 prep. I do a Sunday morning show with Michael Fabiano on the Locked On Network. You can do it on the YouTube on Fantasy Football or the Dynasty Fantasy Football or the NFL one. It broadcasts on all of those. So go check us out on YouTube on Sunday morning at 11:30 Eastern time, 10:30 Central time where I'm at. So that took me a second, but make sure to go listen to us and we will answer any start sit questions that you have live. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen of the day. Go check out the Locked On NFL podcast for your second listen. Tyler, the Madman Rolling, gives you a shot of espresso to start the football day while Tony Wiggins takes you into the barbershop for the smoothest breakdowns to end the day. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great weekend, everybody. Talk to you on Sunday. Bye, y'all.